Great. So now we're live. Welcome, everybody, to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, today from France, I have Ali Greene. Ali, you're a remote work leader, an advocate, a speaker, and very recently, the co-author of a book called Remote Works, Managing for Freedom, Flexibility, and Focus. So first of all, congratulations on having your book published. And the foreword is by Matt Mullenweg. Congratulations on that. What a wonderful
Thank you.
person. Yeah, congratulations on the book. I know how hard it is to do that. And welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much.
I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need in order to get your work done?
Yeah, so number one thing, I always need a cup of coffee nearby. My favorite virtual office to work from is actually a local coffee shop. However, I'm a big believer in Zoom etiquette. So I also have a little home office in all of the homes that I live in. So I live a lot out of Airbnbs. And the number one thing I make sure to have is a dedicated seat at a kitchen table. Today, I'm joining you from an IKEA purchase in my bedroom where I have a Yeti microphone, my laptop, and my coffee. So
All right.
always changing in my world.
So you mentioned that you're moving around a lot. And so I want to dive into that a little bit. You mentioned before we started recording that you were a digital nomad. So explain a little bit about what that looks like for you.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting term. I think through the years, as I have evolved and as remote work has evolved, there's been a lot of different connotations to what it means to be a digital nomad. For me, I started traveling when I left my in office job. It was my reason to escape that lifestyle. And I felt I was living in New York at the time, and I was working with a commute where I had to go on a subway and then another subway and then walk to an office. And I was expected to be there by 8 a.m. And while the work was interesting, the lifestyle was very draining. And I decided at the time, if I was going to leave this lifestyle that a lot of people dream of achieving, that I need to do something very cool. Looking back now, it was a little bit cliche. I decided to backpack and travel around South America. But I learned on that trip through my own experiences and through talking to other people that it was possible to work and travel at the same time. I decided to stay on and do some consulting work with the company I left in New York City and was able to connect with them over emails to figure out what the scope of my new role would be, what the projects would look like, and just keep the lines of communication and the relationship open during my very first trip to South America. And then society and my brain and everything else started trickling back in. It was like, no, you need to have a home. This is what people do. And so I tried to live in a few different places in the United States. And I just never felt connected to the people, to the culture, to the lifestyle in those places I was going. And I finally said to myself, well, hey, listen, I can do really interesting work and I can grow in my career and I can have flexibility to do that because of remote work. But how do I make myself personally fulfilled and happy? Because those two things have to go hand in hand. You can't be happy in your career and unhappy in your life. Ultimately, it'll lead to burnout. It'll lead to, a change of how you view and value your work and yourself. And so I decided to start traveling first in very short trips as an experiment to see if it worked. I planned a co-workation with some of my colleagues to Japan. I traveled alone and I went to places like Colombia and Spain. And then I decided to jump into the lifestyle full time. And since then, I've had so many variations of what it means to be a remote worker, what it means to be a digital nomad, to be untethered from place as it relates to what I do in my life. There was a point in my life where every 3 weeks I was traveling to a different country. And then during the pandemic, I was more or less staying in the same place for 9 or 10 months at a time. And so, with every evolution in my career and my personal life, how I've approached travel and work has changed as well.
So what was the biggest challenge for you as a digital nomad traveling in terms of work context? Like what was the biggest challenge in terms of work?
At the time, I was working for a fully distributed company. So everybody was working remotely from their own corners of the world, but there were very few digital nomads within the company. And so it was funny because one, I was the director of people in a leadership role on the executive team and doing this thing that a lot of people associate with people that are lazy and hang out on the beach and get passive income. And so for me, like neither stereotype was true. And the biggest challenge professionally for me at the time was helping my digital nomad peers understand that I had very serious career growth goals. I wanted to be a full time employee. I wanted to get promoted. I wanted to hire more people to be on my team and manage those people. And I took my job very seriously and I liked the hours I put in. And to get people at my company to understand that when it came to working and collaborating with me, they couldn't have consistency. So, depending on where I was living and where I was traveling, hours where I was available would change. And that meant the deadlines of projects might be different. My open office hours for synchronous calls would be different. And how I would have one on ones with the people I managed would be different. And there were constant evolutions of how do we make this work and be respectful of everybody's needs.
Oh, I can imagine that that was really challenging. So one thing though that really struck me is you said that you had trouble communicating or not communicating with your digital peers, but that your digital nomad peers that they were surprised you took your job so seriously. How is it different amongst other digital nomads?
I think it's really different because there's so much at the time. So, to give additional context, this was back in 2016, 2017. There weren't a lot of jobs where you could be a full time remote employee as well as a digital nomad. I love to see that in the world that is changing. But at the time, it was a lot of people who owns their own businesses, they were freelancers. Entrepreneurs, they relied on passive income. And for me, especially having a role in HR and people ops, a lot of my job, even though it's not a best practice of remote work, was synchronous. Because if there was a problem that came up with a colleague who had questions related to their health insurance benefits, to push them to documentation when there was some sort of an emotional attachment to that work isn't necessarily the vibe that I wanted to give off in my work because I cared about the person and the questions that they had. And so for me, it was all about exploring what are my personal boundaries and what is my dedication and commitment to the work at hand, and how do I balance those two? If someone is upset about their annual performance review and their feedback, that deserves, I think, a synchronous conversation because you're building a relationship. So, as another example. And so, where I struggled with that is how do I make my own schedule where I can be as free and as flexible as my peers who are freelancers, who can decide very last minute, oh, it's beautiful today. I want to go for a hike, or I'm going to finish this work later this afternoon when I already have meetings scheduled. And also start to push back on my own beliefs that a lot of these things couldn't be done asynchronously with the same level of empathy, or that I couldn't just switch my week around based off of my own personal preferences. And today, what that looks like is I love working on the weekends because everybody else is going to the same activities on the weekends and it's hard to park, or the restaurants are busy, or on the hiking trail, you have to stop every 5 seconds and say hi to people. You can't just be alone in nature. And I love taking Wednesdays, if it's a beautiful day, to go for walks and hikes with my partner who also works remotely. And so what I try to do is to never schedule synchronous meetings on Wednesdays so that I can decide last minute if I want to go for a hike or not. And if it's raining that day, I'll do heads down work. If it's beautiful, I'll take the day off. But it allows me spontaneity, which is a personal value of mine. And so I learned in having these kind of conversations with friends and feeling FOMO, how do I have the best of both worlds? And I think I've managed to do that over the years.
I love it. So what do you do for yourself to keep your boundaries in place? Like does what you're talking about here of like taking Wednesdays or maybe working the weekends, it sounds like you've had some thought about your own sort of the work-life fusion and the boundaries. What do you do for yourself to prevent burnout?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I've learned a lot through the years in remote working to have self-awareness over what how I work best, not just where and when, which are two components of remote work. And I've learned that I can resist burnout. And this sounds counterintuitive by doing a little bit of work always, rather than working to my extreme and pushing past it and then needing time to recover. And so I'm the type of worker who likes to chip away at big problems instead of sitting down and having sprints and then feeling tired after the sprint. And so what that looks like in reality is I'm a huge component, like a huge fan of non-linear work days. I like to work a little bit in the morning, take a huge chunk of the day to do other things, and go back to the work in the late afternoon, evening, or right before bed. And so I don't feel the pressure to, even in a day, sit down and do 4 or 5 hours of work all at once, because afterwards I won't be able to get any work done for the rest of the day. The other thing that I've started to have really strong boundaries over is when I take meetings. And due to various personal circumstances in my life, that changes a lot. And so really communicating that clearly with the people that I'm having meetings with on when I'm okay to have meetings late in the evening and when I'm not. And also sharing why, because I think vulnerability and remote work go hand in hand, has been incredibly important in making sure that that's receptive, and setting that schedule in advance instead of only setting that schedule when people are requesting meetings. And so the people I communicate most frequently with every week on like a Monday will know, if we don't have any meetings scheduled ad hoc, here's when I'm available and when I'm not available. And so they already know the bounds in which I'm more likely to say yes to a spontaneous call. However, knowing that most communication that I work with my stakeholders, that is a more day-to-day thing, will always be written up in advance.
How do you communicate that to your team?
So I love Asana. That's a tool I use. I'm a strong believer it's not about the tool, it's about how you use it. But a really cool feature of Asana, and I'm sure it's true in other project management tools, I just haven't explored them as much, is that you can create recurring tasks. And so what happens is, as soon as you sign that you have completed that task, a new fresh one will auto populate with the same information as the week before. And so me and my team, we've built templates where it has questions that everyone fills out on a Monday. And this is something that I did with my team at DuckDuckGo when I was the director of people. And now I do it with my team at Remote Works, which is me and Tam and sometimes other freelancers. And the way it works is basically, this is what our top priority is every week. These are topics that we need to discuss in our meeting because we've tried to communicate it asynchronously and there's more context that needs to be had. These are when we're available, and these are other things on our to-do list that we might need help with. And so those 4 things auto-populate every week. Every Monday we fill it out, and every Friday we close it and say what needs to be carried over to the next week.
Oh, wow. So there's quite a lot of discipline, actually, personal discipline and team discipline that goes into this. Do your team members complain about it? Like that you're on the road, that it's wiggly, or do you
Um,
just get used to it?
I think you just get used to it. I used to complain about it, I think, before I realized that the challenges are so much less like of an impact if everyone's just on the same page and be open that mistakes are going to happen. I think the biggest mistakes that I made were always around time zone issues. And it's funny, you would think that someone who works with a globally distributed team, is a remote worker, and travels frequently would have time zones down. But as soon as daylight savings time hits in the US, but not in Europe, it would always mess up my schedule. And after a few times making mistakes where I would accidentally miss meeting, and then realize, hey, maybe that meeting didn't even need to happen, and I can just apologize to my team and think about creative ways to move forward, then it just makes me look more human because I am human and I make mistakes. And it also allows them to have the same grace when things happen in their life where they need to have last minute changes as well. And so I think more often than not, it was me that was learning how to juggle everything and less my team being impacted.
Right, right. But indeed, I mean, we are all human. I still make time zone mistakes too, and I work with people from all over the world every day. It's so weird. But you're right, that time and daylight savings when the US changes and Europe doesn't, or like that 2 weeks twice a year is just killer, no matter what, if you're moving or not. So we've got to transition into your book because this is
Yes.
like a huge thing. You've just released a book. We're recording this in the middle of February, so it came out last week. Congratulations
Thank
again.
you.
It's called Remote Works: Managing for Freedom, Flexibility, and Focus. And I guess my first question for you is, why did you write this?
Yes. So this book was one of those things that came about really without necessarily a clear business purpose. And so people always ask me, why did you write the book? What is the goal of it for your business? And for me, it's so much more personal than that. My co-author and I met in Cape Town back in 2017. She was working for Automatic at the time, and I was working for DuckDuckGo. And we bonded over the fact that because of our remote jobs, we were able to live the life of our dreams personally. And so many things changed for both of us because of how our work was set up, instead of work being a constraint. And so, flash forward, we had done a lot of projects together, whether it just be traveling together or planning retreats for other digital nomads. And we knew that we liked working with each other, but we had these parallel and separate careers. When the pandemic hit, both of us got really nervous that there was so much commotion and conversation around this giant work from home experiment. And already that like bothered me because it's not a work from home experiment. A lot of people that are in the world of remote work advocacy have probably heard this line a lot before. But it was an emergency situation where people were forced to work in their homes. And I hate working from home, and I've been a remote worker since 2014. So even for people who were so well versed in the behaviors, the skill set, the activities that needed to be part of a distributed team, there were adjustments that needed to be made. And in that environment, I saw companies making mandates, making processes, making decisions around if this was going to be the future for them or not, that was completely untethered from the reality that I knew and all the benefits that I got from remote work, not just professionally, but personally as well. And so in my venting to Tam and her dreaming back to me, and just these casual, friendly conversations around, oh, did you read this article and what they're saying about remote work? Or, oh, this company just made this big announcement that they're, planning their return to office already back in 2020. And we're like, this is silly. Like, people need to know that they can do this. That's where the book came from, is this desire to help what I think is going to be true, regardless of if you work in an office 1 or 2 days a week, 5 days a week, 0 days a week. Remote work fluency and having a skill set to know how to interact in a digital environment will not go away. And so if people get better at it, then companies can decide how to lean into flexibility if they choose. And so that was the driving factor behind the book.
And you've targeted in the book leadership or managers in particular. So why that audience for the book?
Yes, there's two reasons for that. One is I'm a firm believer that managers are the heartbeat of the organization. The manager can control the variance of your employee experience. So a great manager can help you have a great experience at work. And a manager that doesn't know how to lead or coordinate activities remotely is going to be the one requiring you to sit in front of your computer from the hours of 9 to 5, or the one that's putting meetings on your calendar every day to check in and make sure that you're getting your work done. And all of these other sort of micro activities in the workflow of a company that is one layer below what an executive team might decide. So while an executive team can drive a decision to be hybrid or fully remote or in an office, it's the manager that really dictates what that experience looks like. And managers during the pandemic did not have a lot of support. So there was a ton of resources out there for independent contributors around how to work remotely, what tools to use, hacks to be productive, what kind of like ergonomic setups you should have at home. But there wasn't a lot of information taking management skills and translating them to a digital first environment. So, how do you give feedback remotely? How do you know if you should have a meeting or not? How do you handle a situation when everyone on your team wants different things? What do you do? How do you make team norms exist? And so we really felt if we wanted to make the biggest difference on remote working being a really awesome experience for people, that managers were the group to talk to.
And so you're hearing probably the same things that I am, that there's this big disconnect now between managers and people in terms of going back to the office. Why do you think that managers want people back? What do you think that is driving that?
Two things. One, I think managers still don't have the skill sets needed to be confident in their abilities to lead remotely. And it was just easier for them to not have to learn that. And so if people go back to an office, they can go back to their old habits of what performance looks like, checking in and making sure people are motivated or not burnt out. They don't have to grow themselves. So if there's a choice for managers to challenge themselves, put themselves out there and maybe fail, or to go back to an old way of doing things, I think there's this comfort level that we still haven't felt a need to be pushed out of. So that would be a huge thing for me. And two, I think it's a lot to do with, again, what do you do if not everybody's happy? What do you do if there's a situation where there's so many conflicting pieces of information? So your executive team is telling you that they want one thing, the people you manage is telling you they want another thing. There's your own personal experiences. There was an old way of doing things and a new way of doing things. And all of a sudden you get to this idea of maybe we should just compromise and decide the strategy later. Maybe, what worked best for me in my career so far is where I can better coach someone. So let's go back to that level of familiarity, and sort of these subconscious biases are coming up that really impact their decision.
I think it's so strange because you would think after it wasn't like we were at home for 2 weeks, right? It was 2+ years that people were making this adjustment. So that seems like enough time to form new habits and learn new skills to me. Like, okay, but clearly that has not happened. People are wanting people back at the office, and it's fine. I mean, my husband also loves working from the office or with other people. He hates working from home. So I'm also reminded that there's strong preferences that people in teams also have, which is fine. I think probably the same as you, is the future of work is choice. We all have the choice to work when and where we're most productive. That seems like the best for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's 100% about choice. And what I hate that's happening right now in the media is there's two positions. There's a return to office or a hybrid model. There's a remote work model. And to me, that dichotomy shouldn't exist, because for the future of work, a lot of things will be remote first. Documentation being stored online so you can access it anywhere is a core belief of a remote working system. Equitable information and resources being shared to all employees, regardless of what functional area they are in the company or how close they're located to the office, is a belief for diversity and inclusion that is a remote first working model. Why should information only be heard casually in a conversation over lunch? If it's critical to the success of a project, then it should be available to everybody at any time. And so what I see around remote work, hybrid, return to office, is that we're having the wrong conversation. I believe the right conversation is, it's been 2 years and still managers have not learned how to effectively do some of these skills, like how to create a culture of documentation, how to hold people accountable for that, how to set it up. They get a tool that's shiny and they think it's going to solve all their problems, but nobody's ever taught them how to use that tool, how to roll it out, how to do that change management to get people comfortable with it. And so there's still a lot of nuances that need to be put in the forefront of education within companies to get them comfortable with working remotely. And then socializing and connection and team building can happen in any way by any choice. I also hate working from home. I do not like working alone. I'm a remote worker and I would not trade my lifestyle to go back to an office. And what I do instead is I work from coffee shops. I invite friends to work with me in totally unrelated industries. So I'll write the book at a coffee shop with someone who is a translator or someone who owns a yoga studio, and we'll sit down and we'll hold each other accountable and say, for the next hour, like, what are you working on today? Oh, this is what I'm working on today. Then we'll have 5 minutes to drink our coffee and chat and have that social connection, do our work. And then you can even bring that back to your own company and say, hey, I worked with someone today who works in the creative field, and these are some challenges they're facing, and this is how it could be useful for this product our design team's working on. Even though I work in HR, who cares? And that way of being seen in organizations is just as good as showing up to an office and working with people that are getting paid by the same person. To me, the definition of coworker needs to change.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. The definition of coworker needs to change. I do like that. Indeed. Indeed, because you're going to the same place with the same people every single day. I mean, we know that creativity is happens when we're in new places with new people and trying new things, new atmospheres. So there's a lot of arguments to be made for that. Okay, well, we're totally running out of time, but I have like a million more questions. So I'm going to try to just really focus on the last things. One thing that I wanted to ask about is I read in your LinkedIn that one of the things you like to do is to create extravagant meals while working remotely. So
Yes.
let's what does that
Actually,
mean?
that's so funny. I'm doing that tonight, and I didn't even realize that we would talk about it on the podcast. So when I am working from home, the benefit I get is that I love to cook, and I usually do cooking in 12 parts. Tonight, I'm making a curry. And so downstairs right now in the oven. This is an hour-long podcast at a low temperature. I needed to roast a pumpkin for about an hour before I could cut it up and then mix it into the curry. So I like to have these little micro breaks where I'm focused and then I get to do something away from the screen, give my eyes a rest. And tonight I'll reap the benefits of all these little micro breaks throughout the day, which is this pumpkin and chickpea curry that is currently in the works. And that's something I do often.
I love it. Well, one of the things that we know about virtual working is that most of us spend way too much time in 2D, like a very serious amount of time. And so these micro breaks, I'm hearing it more and more, and the science is showing more and more that micro breaks away from the screen, standing up, moving our bodies, doing something to help our eyes is actually really good. I do the same thing. I have now befriended 9 neighborhood cats that come
Oh,
regularly to my back door because I go downstairs and like stand in the garden for a few minutes and like stretch out, and then I go back to work. And then in that time period, a cat strolls by and you become friends over time. So yeah, I've got like this huge cat fest in the backyard from all my micro breaks. So I highly encourage others to try that as well. Okay, but let's get back to the topic. So a couple of things to take us out. Your book, every chapter ends with Allie's advice and Tam's tips. I love that. So, what I would like to do is for our second to the last question for the day, I would love to have you give us what is some of Allie's advice for leaders who are still skeptical. You can pick a different tip if you want, if you had something in your head that was different, but like I'd kind of like to focus it on leaders, like Allie's advice for leaders. What's one tip that you would give?
yeah, I love this. This is something in the book and also that I've shared publicly more recently, which is everything stems from self-awareness. So I think leaders are getting caught up in the wrong thing, which is creating the cycle we talked about today of not actually getting to the next level of the skill set of remote work fluency needed to succeed in leading in a distributed environment. So instead of digging into what tools to use, when to have video chats, how to be more engaged on video, how to do team building activities and not make them boring or things that people actually want to show up to, like none of those things matter. Those things are the cherry on top. The thing that matters is that everything stems from self-awareness. So the more you figure out who you are as a leader, what you enjoy about managing people, what your personal quirks are, like mine, messing up time zones during daylight savings time, and how it translates to the remote environment, the easier it will be to set expectations and to build trust, which are the building blocks of remote work.
Love it. Everything stems from self awareness. And your book has a number of different checklists and exercises and tools that people can use, or just, things that techniques that people can use to really become more self-aware about leadership styles. So definitely we'll be putting in the show notes a link to that. So as our final question for today, a very easy one, which is if people want to learn more about you and your book, where should they go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So you can find me there, both me, Allie Greene, and our company, Remote Works Book. And for more information on the book, it's remoteworksbook.com.
Great. And we'll put all of that in the show note for easy access. Allie, thank you so much for your time today. I took copious notes and look forward to putting those in the show notes. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. And until next time, be powerful.